Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Tonight, then, time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist, Kevin Maguire, and the political commentator, Adam Bolton, with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome and lovely to see both of you. So let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? Presumably no guessing. Here's the Financial Times, leading with the Chancellor's spending review announcements, picking up on her assertion the £113 billion worth of investment across a wide variety of sectors is being done in the interests of renewal. The Times says what we saw today was the Chancellor turning on the tax and spend taps. This is The Guardian. Reeves gambles on renewing Britain to win the trust of voters. The Telegraph points out that spending on police and defence has been hit in order to give more to the NHS, with the Eye saying that tax rises now look inevitable to pay for the Chancellor's plans. That is also the theme for the front page of the Daily Express. Brace for tax pain, they say. The Metro calls today's announcement the spend of austerity, and the Mail labels it a reckless splurge that we and our children will be paying off for years, while the Sun says her plans to end spending on Channel migrants in hotels by 2029 is a shambles. The headline, Vive la farce. The Mirror turns its attention to moves to recover money spent on PPE clothing during the COVID pandemic from a company run by Conservative peer Baroness Mone. And the death of Beach Boys legend Brian Wilson is top story in The Star, with a headline based on one of his greatest songs, God Only Knows What We'll Be Without You. So let's bring in Kevin and Adam. First spread in the papers, Adam. How will Number 11 be thinking of that reaction, do you think, in the papers?
Well, it's quite clear that the right-wing papers we'll come to later on, the Mail, the Telegraph and the Express have tipped a bucket over the whole thing, saying tax is coming. But if you look at the broadsheets, the FT sort of pretty much, with its front page, sums it up, both with its headline about the renewal push. That was the word. We're not talking about change anymore. We're talking about renewal, aren't we? But it then sort of has 4 bullet points. Borrowing fuels spending spree on big capital projects. NHS gains 29 billion boost as defence and education win. Squeeze on the Home Office and the police, that's an issue. Foreign Office and the Culture Ministry, and Conservatives saying the Chancellor will be forced to increase taxes, and that is, as I was saying, taken up in the Mail and the Express and elsewhere.
And will those departments who have done well, the NHS, for example, actually do? Is it enough for them? Because Matthew Taylor of the NHS Confederation saying, you know, that we're still bumping along the bottom, effectively. Yeah,
it's interesting. You look at the front of the FT, talking about the editorial in it, that they've written, ministers must now ensure cash is spent wisely and spiralling costs fall, because, of course, if you put the money into the NHS, you've got to get something out of it. There are threats of strikes for higher pay awards that would take some of the cash away. You've got to get waiting lists down, hit that target of operations being within 18 weeks. It's not been met for a decade now. It's going to be difficult, because they pick out, just looking at, they pick out the NHS, defence and education as wins. It's interesting, I think housing was a bigger win than education, but the FT's picked on education. But there is this squeeze on the Home Office.
And the whole point...
Foreign Office, culture, big cuts.
I mean, as Darren Jones, the Financial Secretary, has been saying, he was saying it on Sky News earlier tonight, the figure's just about balance, and within that, there's no need for tax increases, but they've got to be absolutely right. You've got to save that £1 billion from, for example, getting rid of migrant hotels, and departmental spending on administration is being cut by enormous amounts, 15 to 25% per department. And if they don't hit those targets, then the only route looks like tax cuts.
That's a big efficiency target. I think it's 14 billion. Even with AI writing your letters for you and sending them out as emails rather than putting them in the post.
It's a bit of a fingers crossed moment, isn't it?
Yeah, but the Institute of Fiscal Studies does point out that the big spending increases have already been in place. So she talked up the numbers, and in some ways they are big, particularly on infrastructure and investment, which will be funded by borrowing. They are big, but it's going to be tight. as they say. It's not as the taps haven't been turned on as much as the right-wing papers would say they have.
Yeah, well, and just on the Home Office, you mentioned there, the last few paragraphs devoted to that. After bitter negotiations with the Home Secretary, the Home Office budget will be squeezed by 1.7% in real terms. Reeves said police spending power would rise an average 2.3% a year, but council tax bills may need to rise by the maximum 5% to enable the increase in spending power, according to Paul Johnson, Director of the IFS, and certainly Darren Jones, who you quoted, accepted that the precept on policing most likely would be at the maximum.
It's a very unpopular tax, council tax.
Well, indeed so. And in fact, the squeeze on Angela Rayner's department, bar housing, you know, it's quite interesting. The Times, Chancellor turns on the tax and spend tabs. A lot of this, though, Adam, is capital expenditure. So it's turning on the borrowing squeeze as well, isn't it?
Well, that's right. It is, you know, we've heard an awful lot about the fiscal rules, and the fiscal rules say you can't borrow for day-to-day spending of government, but you can borrow for infrastructure investment. And that basically is where Rachel Reeves has got her good news to spend, particularly on, you know, it looks like things aimed to consolidate the red wall for Labour and to see off reform. So a lot of transport, particularly away from London and the South East, although there is some money for there. And it's also being pointed out, as the Times story points out, that if the government is not going to raise central taxation, it looks like they're going to allow the council tax to go up by an average of 5% year on year. So that's taxation by the back door, but people will certainly feel that.
Well, it's kind of pushing it away, so arm's length, and putting the responsibility on local authorities. If you're a Labour local authority, you may pay a price for that. But it was quite sensible for her to change her rules to separate day-to-day spending from investment spending. Because if you're going to your supermarket shop, you've got to borrow for it. That's an error. But if you're doing up your house and you borrow to do that and you invest it, that's quite sensible. And you've got all these projects that are going to pay back over a long period of time.
But still, I mean, the figures they're giving in the Times piece, they're saying that the Treasury is suggesting that local authorities would raise council tax by 5% a year for the rest of this Parliament for social care and policing. That translates into 7.5 billion increase in council tax revenue, adding 359 to the average Band D household bill.
So that's not insignificant, is it? That's the point you're making.
It's £7 a week, but it's to a household bill, so it's not per person.
Yeah.
So the two people in a house, it's equivalent to £3.50
Wipes out the winter
over the period.
Doesn't it? Restored to 9 million pensioners, to be fair.
It would do that, but just having some perspective on it.
Well, the Daily Telegraph picks up on some of those issues we're talking about. Reeves hits police and defence even to fund the NHS. This is because the holy grail of ever-increasing GDP spend on defence is not achieved, I suppose.
Yeah.
If we're going to get to 3%, or as NATO wants 5% now.
Yeah, I think picking up on policing is fair. I think defence, it's still going up a fair amount. Maybe not as much as the Daily Telegraph would like, but of course. We're journalists, you always call for more. How are you going to fund it? What are you going to cut to do it? And if you're the Chancellor, it doesn't matter which political party you have, you've got to make it all balance in the end, and you've got to make choices. She talked about Labour choices this time. Personally, I just think this increasing defence spending is baloney, because we spend so much already. But nevertheless, she's put it up. I think the Telegraph have been a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the Telegraph has picked up on a bit of the. The sort of magic with figures, pointing out that Rachel Reeves told Parliament that there was going to be an increase of 2.3%, but in fact there was already a boost to cover the national insurance increase, so the new money, as it were, is only 1.7%. And what they're also doing is they're going to the veterans, police chiefs, saying that, well, if we're funding at this level, we might not be able to hit your manifesto pledges on cutting down on crime and police numbers, and also military chiefs saying that it's not enough what is there. And what's interesting is that in the Green Book, which is now the Blue Book, Just the cover of it is blue.
And no OBR.
They don't really explain how defence spending is going to go up towards this 3% target.
But no, that's going to be the election battleground. Which, if you're going to have a 17 to 20 billion pound extra on defence over the next Parliament to go from 2.5% to 3%, how's that going to be funded? Or what are other parties going to propose themselves?
Yeah, and Alistair Heath, I think he's the editor of the Sunday Telegraph, but also a Star columnist. But he never
minces his words, are you trying to say?
Yes,
this is the Chancellor that lazy, feckless Britain deserves. And the headline, it seems, came from the Resolution Foundation, said the surge in health spending would leave little to rebuild other public services. Think tank describing increases for defence and education as small. Extra funding for the police is expected to amount to just £200 million in real terms by the end of the decade. And it said so far 3,000 of the 13,000 extra neighbourhood officers pledged by the government have been recruited so far. Police leaders now fear the remainder will not be paid for.
Well, they had big targets on halving violence against women and girls, halving knife crime, 13,000 extra officers, although some of them were specials and community support officers, so not all full-time bobbies. But Alistair Heath, of course, welcomed Liz Truss's budget with great fanfare. But I wonder if he includes Daily Telegraph readers amongst the lady and feckless.
No. I was just thinking he takes such a hard line condemning people, but perhaps that this is the Chancellor that lazy, feckless Britain deserves means that he approves of it.
In the meantime, the Guardian picks up on Reeves's gamble on renewing Britain. To be fair, she said, we are renewing Britain to laughter in the House of Commons from some on the benches. Well, there we are. But the point is, there's a feeling that this is, not like the previous governments. They have been spending more, and Britain's not feeling it yet. Will they feel it now? Is the question.
She joked tonight to Labour MPs and peers at the Parliamentary Labour Party that even the Guardian was saying it's no return to austerity, and she was actually spending. Yeah. But it is. I think gambles. It is a gamble. It really is a gamble because the government's falling quite spectacularly in its not even the first year yet. Yeah. And it's whether it can revive itself politically and begin delivering and people feel better off and they see services are improving. So I think the gambles is absolutely right.
I mean, the story all the way now to the budget is going to be, can she avoid tax rises?
Well, this is exactly what Sir Mel Stride said in the Commons, the iPaper picking up on that. Tax rise is now inevitable to pay for Reeves's £2 trillion spending. What did he call it? It's the spend now, tax later review, didn't he? Meantime, the Daily Mail, a reckless splurge we and our children will be paying off for years, which is the borrowing element again.
And the problem, of course, is that interest rates on borrowing are increasing. So that means that the amount of money which you have to pay to cover your interest payments is going up. And that is really what could knock Rachel Reeves out of kilter, really, on all of this. And, I mean, 2 trillion of spending, I mean, that's a lot of money. You think the average sort of GDP now is what is getting on to 2 trillion, isn't it? So.
Yeah, but we and our children will also enjoy better health service improvements in schools, including breakfast clubs and free school meals for a wider number of people, better housing, improved transport, better energy system. So there is it's kind of there's a plus to it as well as a negative.
Yeah, and another Star columnist pouring scorn on it, Andrew Neil. As delusional drivel, this was in a class of its own.
He's not describing his own column, is he? Sorry, Andrew.
I thought you were looking down, not up. I looked up and you said another Star columnist.
Liz, while he had 66, I will never have sex again.
Yeah, that wasn't relevant.
I know. That's nothing to do with the...
Just pointing it out.
It's nothing to do with a spending review, is it?
Don't blame me.
No, sorry.
It's fine. That was my fault. Anyway, coming up next is the UK's deal for cooperation over nuclear submarines. You might remember it with the US and Australia sunk, and if so, why? We'll discuss that next.
Over there, to your left. There have been airstrikes every day. Hezbollah are very sensitive about us showing any pictures, and we're being hurried away right now. It felt akin to riding into some sort of Armageddon. Many other areas have been hit badly. There are shells coming in every few minutes. Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city, where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. It's trying to hit us. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on. A lot of hits coming in still. We were the first journalists and the only outsiders to reach the site of the attack several weeks after it happened.
We found from the missile.
It's very difficult to see what around here could be conceived of as a legitimate military target. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, a boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Getting up close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. We head to the FT with Kevin and Adam. And this is the great fanfare. Do you remember when Rishi Sunak stood there launching this amazing deal, it seemed, between the US and Australia about submarines? And now there's a wobble, a big wobble in it.
Yeah, well, of course, it was a Biden deal, so Trump's administration is immediately against it. And it's all over whether 5 US nuclear-powered subs that were going to go to Australia, whether they will go or whether the US wants to keep them themselves, or if they do go to Australia, whether the Australians make a commitment they will use them against China should Taiwan be invaded. But it was a pillar of global security. And as the FT says now, both London and Canberra are incredibly anxious.
I mean, it's more Trump derangement, because the idea was Britain and Australia would build the next generation of submarines, but in the meantime, the Americans would give them their nuclear submarines. And now the Americans are saying, basically, we haven't got any to spare. It's more taking longer for us to build up our submarines. We don't have spare ones to give to the Australians and the British. So it's yet another crack, really, in America's defence cooperation with the rest of the world.
Yeah, it feels significant, doesn't it? Certainly.
Yeah.
Your paper, Kevin, the Daily Mirror, this is Baroness Michelle Mone and PPE during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, and it's the court case that started on whether MedPro, the her husband's company she was linked to should have to repay 122 million for gowns that were deemed by the Department of Health to be unusable. 103 of 140 tested were deemed to be unusable, to be contaminated, while it should have only been 1 in a million. Now, of course, the company is contesting this. It's not really about the VIP lane, it is about the quality of these gowns. And I know
they both deny wrongdoing, obviously.
Absolutely.
And as you say,
but I know why the
challenging
Mirror will have splashed on it rather than on the Reeves spending. Reeves spending was the splash this morning.
Yes.
And they just know this gets a huge public response, which is not in favour of Michelle Mone.
I mean, the point really is that this is based on the legal submissions in the case, and it has been submitted that Michelle Mone was actively involved in procuring the contract, which, of course, initially she denied.
Yeah.
But the judge has also said that's irrelevant to this case, that basically the case is about did Borrowman's company, her husband's company, and he's always been much, much richer than she was within the marriage, did his company basically provide dodgy gear that wasn't sterile.
Yeah, which they say no to. But let's go to the Daily Star, shall we? God only knows what will be without you. You know, the musical genius is how he was described today. But at times deeply troubled, Brian Wilson, who's died.
Yes, indeed. You know, it has to be said he was the genius of the Beach Boys, and you know, they were... Two of his brothers were in the original Beach Boys and the cousin as well. But he was the one who wrote the music, who wrote the songs.
The harmonising.
And you know, had a pretty key role at the beginning of the 60s because groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were actually inspired to write their own stuff by Brian Wilson. And he was always worried about his weight. There's a wonderful biopic about him called Love and Mercy. And he also experimented with drugs, so he went through long periods of recession, of depression and being secluded. But in recent years, he did a very successful tour of one of their albums, Smile, with the... you know, where they played at the Festival Hall and elsewhere. So, you know, a major figure in Anglo-British pop.
Yeah, he leaves good vibrations. He was the soundtrack of many a summer. Yeah. But he was a troubled, complex genius, and it's R.I.P.
I mean, he had a sort of way. There's a story that Don Henley of the Eagles was a fan, went to see him and said, "Would you sign my copy of one of the records?" And he signed it, and he said to Don, "Thanks for the great songs." And then as Don was leaving the room, he called him back and he said, crossed out great and wrote good.
When I heard Brian Wilson had died, I immediately thought of the ex-minister, the Labour minister and MP. I need to get